Hi everyone, my name's Andrew and welcome back to Jackawawa Studios. This week we're going to do something interesting. I'm going to take some old school acrylic painting techniques that I've developed over the years and I'm going to be applying those to plastic rather than canvas. It could be a failure, it could be great. Check it out, let's see how it goes. So a couple of months ago, some colleagues of mine actually sent me this painter pot kit. It's a pretty good kit, came with a couple of pots, it came with a bunch of paint and some paint brushes, and it enabled you to paint sort of scenes onto a pot that you could use in your garden. So I thought it was kind of interesting, I thought I'd give it a go. So one of the interesting things I've learned after painting over the years is if you paint directly onto a white background, you're actually left with white marks sometimes between the paint. So you can see two lines there that I've drawn and you can see there's white marks in between. It's actually really difficult to get the paint to join up. And even if you do, sometimes you get bleeding in between the two paints, which means the two colours mix together and give you a third different result. So if I have a look at this painting that I've done previously, I actually used three different base colours for this, a green, a blue and a grey. So when I look at my pot, you can see the pot is quite stark and quite white, and I want to actually reduce that down by putting a base colour in. Now the colours I'm going to use on the pot are predominantly going to be blues and greens and maybe some dark blues and even greys. So I'm going to do a base colour of light blue on this pot. A second tip I've got for anyone that's starting out, use a bit of aluminium foil to mix up your paints. It's cheap, it's convenient, and it's way better than go buying a palette, which you'll be able to use maybe for a day or two before having to throw it out. So all I'm doing here is just applying a very light base coat of acrylic blue paint to the pot, and that's going to give me my base so I can actually start painting the images that I'm looking for on top of that base. Now when applying a base coat, it's usually a good idea just to use a neutral colour, and it doesn't have to be particularly even or particularly strong, just has to cover up that white so we're not getting that come through when we apply the other layers of paint. The next tip I've got for anyone that's starting out in art is to actually plan your images before you start painting. I remember a history teacher of mine back in high school used to say, hey, you need to plan your essays before you start writing. I thought I'd be smart enough to be able to just go in there and write a masterpiece. I quickly found out that she was right. I believe it's the same with painting. There may be artists out there that can just go onto a canvas and start painting and produce something that's awesome, but I find that if you actually take the time to plan your images out a little bit, it'll give you a better result and you'll be happier with the outcome. So what I'm doing now is just cutting a few pieces of paper that are about the same size as the pot. So once I've cut my pieces of paper, I'm able to start drawing the design on there. So the design for this pot is going to be a number of different couples that are dancing. So I'm just drawing those silhouettes out and I'm going to use them to trace that onto the pot. Another tip for you is if you don't know what a couple dancing looks like in silhouette, go and have a look at Google. There's plenty of images there. They're pretty easy to copy. So once I've done my silhouette drawings, again I can change those quite easily. If I've done them in pencil on paper, you can rub bits out, you can reinforce pieces, but I'm pretty happy with those. I'm going to go ahead. The next thing I'm going to do is actually cut those images out, and I'm going to use those images just to give myself a little bit of a stencil design onto the pot. So just stick them on the pot, use a little bit of, again, that light blue paint, slightly darker this time, and paint around that image, and that's going to give me a really nice stencil that I'm going to be able to follow as I go through and paint the rest of this pot. So the other option is, if you're not a fan of stencil technique, is to use a freehand paint technique where you're just actually transferring the image onto the pot. So I could use a pencil for this, but pencil sometimes comes through with acrylic paint. So in this case I'm just using again another blue wash, slightly darker, and I'm just going to freehand paint that image onto the pot, and that's just going to give me a guide for my final design. Note, I'm going to paint over these, so this isn't going to be the final image that you're going to see, but there's going to be a guide for my design. So they're the three images I've got painted onto the pot. Now I'm ready to start going in and thinking about doing that final paint. So once I've painted my outline or my stencils onto the pot, I'm actually ready to start going through and painting in the final design. So what I've decided to do with this pot is to use a cubist style or technique, or a mosaic style. I'm going to paint the whole pot with triangles. I'm going to paint the couples that are dancing with smaller, darker triangles, and I'm going to paint the outside with larger, lighter triangles, and that'll give me the contrast that I'm looking for so that the image actually stands out, even though the colours are really similar and the shapes that I'm using are very similar as well. So I'm just going to go through and start painting triangles. So I have my first silhouette painted out, and it's time to start painting the background. You may also notice that some of the colours are not looking particularly consistent in those triangles, and that is one of the issues with acrylic paint, is that you sometimes find that it's not thick enough to actually really mask that undercolour. So we may have to go over multiple times and add different layers. That's okay, that's just part of the acrylic painting process. With oil paints you don't get that so much, but with acrylic it can certainly happen. So again, I'm just coming in and doing some touch-ups on that image so we get a more consistent paint, and that's what I'm looking for. So once I'm happy with the first image, I can move on to the second one. And you can see I'm using some darker colours here, some blacks and some darker blues to paint this image out. Again, just to give it a different contrast and see how it goes. Again, with that dark blue, you can see that it's starting to not be consistent. So I'm probably going to have to come back and put 2, if not 3 coats on some of those darker blue areas. That's fine. As I said, I was expecting to do that. I know the acrylic paint is not super thick. The last thing I thought would be fun, this whole colour pot is done in various shades of blue and green, but I just thought with this last couple it might be fun to put some red shoes on the lady. And the last thing I do, as I said, is just doing some of those touch-ups that I was talking about. When you have those colours that are a little bit inconsistent, they're a little bit change in tone, you go through and just paint over the top of those again, and we'll get it actually a better, more consistent outcome, and that's really what I'm looking for here. So the last step in this particular process is to add a sealant to the pot. This is actually something that came with the pot set. They said once you've done your design, add this sealant to it and it should aid with the waterproofing of the pot. Likewise, if you're doing a canvas painting, you might want to put some varnish on there. You can buy spray varnish, or you can actually buy liquid varnish and paint it on like the sealant that I'm doing here. Once I've painted that sealant on, I'll let it dry and the pot should be done. If you like my stuff, hit the subscribe button. If you've got a question or a comment, put it in there and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. Till next time, I'm Andrew, this is Jackawawa Studios.